Hi, I'm Lissie.
And I'm Simmons,
We're here to talk to you about stuff.
especially history. We're doing a podcast about history.
Hi,
we're the Inkdrinkers. Contrary to our name, we don't actually drink ink.
We just drink tea and talk about history.
So join us as we learn about history.
Indeed.
Today we are talking about Sir Francis Drake and the Spanish Armada, as well as Calico Jack, Anne Bonny, and Mary Read. All right, let's get into it.
Let's get into it.
So how it worked out this time is I ended up doing more research into Sir Francis Drake, and Lissie did more research into the other three. So I did a little bit on both, and she did a little bit on both, but so that's how it's going to be going this time. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about the life of Sir Francis Drake. So he was born in 1540. When he was 17, he made one of the first English slaving voyages with John Hawkins, and this was from Africa to the New World. Mm-hmm. And they were attacked by a Spanish squadron, and after that time, Spain became a lifelong enemy of Drake's, which seems to be a trend with pirates.
It does.
A lot of pirates and privateers that we talk about seem to be
Against Spain.
Yeah, English with a hatred of Spain.
Or French.
Mm-hmm. Or French. Mm-hmm. So when he was 27, Queen Elizabeth I commissioned him to attack Spanish colonies on the American Pacific coast. He set out with 5 ships in 1577, and by the time he reached his destination in 1578, he only had 1 ship. So they lost a lot.
Wow.
I believe due to weather and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. He sailed along the west coast of South America, plundering all the Spanish ports he could find. And he continued going north. He was hoping to find a passage through to the Atlantic Ocean, as many people were doing during that time and later. So he sailed up the coast of South America, if you can picture that, and he made it further north than anybody else had at that time. He made it to about California. California is. He didn't find a passage, go figure, and turned back west across the Pacific to sail back. He sailed by Indonesia, around the bottom of Africa, and back across the Atlantic. Mm-hmm. And he arrived back in England in 1580. They had spent months at time at sea before going into ports on this voyage. He had 80 men in his crew, and apparently Drake, even though it's hard, being out from ports for months at a time without that many supplies, Drake still was attending to the needs of his men and making sure they had what they needed. And despite the length of the voyage, 1577 to 1580, 3 years, very few men were lost to disease, which was rare for not very many men to be lost to disease.
I can imagine.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure there still were some, but... Mm-hmm. In 1581, Elizabeth knighted Drake, and he became mayor of Plymouth, and later a member of Parliament, which I found very interesting.
That is very interesting.
So the Spanish, he saw the Spanish as like his enemy, like his lifelong enemy. That was the other interesting thing I forgot to mention, that when Elizabeth sent him across to attack Spanish ports, England was not officially at war with Spain.
Really?
Yes. Usually a privateer, when they receive their letter of marque, it's in time of war to go and raid the enemy's areas, but they weren't at war.
Yeah.
So I found that.
Yeah, and if you don't remember what a letter of marque is, check out our previous video in the series. It explains letters of marque, and we go a little in depth on that.
So yeah, they weren't at war, which I thought was very interesting and a little off.
Yeah.
Anyway, so in 1588, you've probably heard about the Spanish Armada. The Spanish Armada was a fleet of ships that left Spain to go up and attack England, because King Philip of Spain had been previously married to Queen Mary.
Yeah. The Queen Mary that she is referring to is also referred to as Bloody Mary. She reigned for about 5 years in England after her brother Edward died, and briefly after her cousin Jane ruled, before she beheaded her cousin.
Which I really hate that because I like Queen Jane.
Queen Jane was amazing.
I like her,
Yeah.
even if she only got to reign for 9 days. Another story, another time. Anyway, so he was married to Queen Mary. Once Mary died, then, Elizabeth became queen, and Philip, of course, wanted that throne. So he was going to sail up the channel to England and defeat the English, and Philip would take over as king. That was the plan. And they set out with 130 ships. They were considered invincible. These were the best of the best. It was an amazing fleet that left Spain. Drake took them by surprise and attacked them, and he weakened them a great deal, but they still made it to England. And after quite a bit of fighting, after they reached England with Drake's ships and other English ships, finally the Armada was scattered to sea. It's a very interesting story. If you want to hear more of the story of Drake and the Armada, you can look up. There's full accounts, eyewitness accounts out there of the battle. But after all of the fighting, the Armada was scattered to sea, and 65 out of those 130 ships returned home.
That is a lot of ships lost.
It is. The Spanish lost about half their ships, and 20,000 men. Whereas the English, who were greatly outnumbered to begin with, lost 0 ships and 100 men. His last expedition, Drake's last expedition, was with John Hawkins, which I again found very interesting. That his first, he was at sea at an early age, but his first official voyage at 17, the sailing voyage, was with John Hawkins. I can talk today, guys. And then his last expedition was with John Hawkins to the West Indies.
Interesting.
The Spanish raided them, and it was a complete disaster, and they were, pretty much beat up there. And both Hawkins and Drake died at the same time in 1596 and were buried at sea.
I think that would be a cool burial.
It's very interesting, for sure. We should do some more looking into burials at sea, because it's an interesting concept to me.
It really is.
So there's a lot of debate on whether Drake was an actual pirate or a privateer. Again, the Spanish considered him very much a pirate. But
obviously, it's the Spanish point of view.
Yes, but if you look him up online, there's not very many people that actually consider him a pirate. But he was certainly not a good guy. On his expedition to the Spanish ports that Queen Elizabeth sent him on, he did a lot of things he didn't have authority to do. For example, Thomas Doughty thought that he and Drake should share command of the ship, and there was a little bit of words about that, and Drake tried and executed him for mutiny, which was something that he actually had not really any authority to do.
That's lovely.
And Doughty's relatives, the man that was executed, once Drake got back to England, wanted to prosecute him, but you can't really touch the Queen's favorite person, so
no. That has bad idea written all over it.
Didn't go anywhere. And then I kind of already mentioned this, Drake's private war with Spain. He claims the Spanish crown had done him personal wrong and that he was entitled to make reprisal against them by raiding the empire. And they saw him as a pirate. Drake was pitiless. He burned churches, he and his men, when they were in raiding the Spanish ports. They burned churches, tortured captives, and abandoned slaves on an island. He would free slaves, but then he abandoned some of them on an island. Yeah, again, he's not a great guy. And probably all of the pirates out there are not great guys. So that is about Drake and the Spanish Armada.
Interesting. I had no idea that he did a lot of that because, my family read a book, I can't remember when it was sometime last year. But we listened to an audiobook on Sir Francis Drake. And it was mostly about the point of view of 2 of his crew members that were lads. But from what I heard, he was a righteous man. He thought he was doing good. He was more exploring from what I heard. Of course, the rest of the book was about his crew members having been lost and going on their journey across the South American continent. But I'd never thought of him as having committed murders like that. abandoning people, burning churches. I mean, I guess you kind of have the Spanish Inquisition, and they were a little ruthless. But
at this point, nobody is good.
Yeah.
Everybody's doing murdering and everything right back and forth. But that's a little bit why we're doing this series, is to show, like, the world nowadays thinks of pirates as a certain way, and then there's another thing of what they were.
Yep, just like they're not all Jack Sparrows. You have Francis how do you pronounce it? It's a French last name, Le Olenois, or something to that effect. And he's basically just another version of Blackbeard. And he's just as bad. Like, not all these pirates were good. And some of these pirates aren't really considered pirates these days. But they still were on the verge of pirate.
Basically what a pirate does is they raid ships and ports and take captives and take loot and destroy their enemies. And privateers and pirates are basically do the same thing. Except for one is legal and one is not.
One's legal, one's not. I mean, technically it shouldn't be legal, but sadly it was.
Yeah. Talked about that in our other episode too. So.
Yep. So the next pirate we have is Calico Jack Rackham. His first name was actually John, but he got the name Calico Jack because he wore calico shirts, which I think is very interesting. Because you get Blackbeard and he's got this bad name because he's got this weird crazy look in his eye. He's got his beard, which is black and full of smoking whatevers. Fire. And then you have Calico Jack. I'm Calico Jack, and I was named that because of my shirt. It's a pretty good-looking shirt.
That's hilarious.
In 17 and 18, he was in another pirate named Charles Vane. And Charles Vane, he's a whole nother pirate, whole nother bad guy. He was the enemy of the governor of Jamaica. We know that much. But at one point, Captain Vane made a call that Calico Jack didn't exactly like. He was going to let a ship pass because Captain Vane had experience. He knew what he was doing. He said they were not going to raid that ship because it would not be an easy take. He would lose a lot of men. He might get captured. He doesn't want to get captured. He's a pirate. But Calico Jack didn't like this, and he caused a mutiny and kicked Vane off of the ship. Slightly literally, I believe.
Wow.
And
mutiny
took over the ship, captured the other ship, and the same day after he became captain, raided several more ships and just sacked them, set them on fire. It was very interesting. A year after he became captain of Captain Vane's ship, he got a little tired of his pirating ways. He didn't exactly become tired. He was done. So he asked for a pardon from the governor of Jamaica, Governor Woods Roger.
It was, Woods Roger, I would say.
Woods Roger, yeah. And Calico Jack claimed that Charles Vane had insisted that the entire crew become pirates, which is entirely fake. I mean, they all made their choices. And so the Governor Rogers, he hates Vane, and he's like, okay, I pardon all of you. If this guy, who I hate, made you pirates, then you must be telling the truth because this guy's a bad guy. So he lets them go. He gives them a pardon. They lived there, but it didn't take this crew very long for them to become sick for the sea. Which reminds me, what is a pirate's favorite letter?
Her dad literally told me this 20 minutes ago.
Yep.
R?
No, it's not R. You'd think it was the R, but it's actually the C. All of these pirates liked the sea, so they went back to their pirating ways. And it was around this time that Captain Calico Jack met a young pirate by the name of Bon. Her actual name was Anne Bonny, but she went by the name of Bon. Anne Bonny was married to James Bonny, and Anne Bonny ran away with Calico Jack. A little bit of background on Mary Bonny. She was born...
Anne Bonny.
Sorry, what'd I say?
Mary.
A little bit of background on Anne Bonny. My apologies. Anne Bonny, there's a whole story. Her father, as she got older, dressed her up as a boy so that she could work for him. His wife heard about this, and she got mad, and she cut off whatever money she had been giving him, and he lost all his business because he was a lawyer. The man, after losing his business, took his maid person, his daughter that he was dressing as a son, and took them to the Carolinas. Now, Anne Bonny got a wild streak in her. She went off to the sea, dressed as a man, and here is where she met this sailor, James Bonny. They got married, everything was happy, and then, of course, she meets Calico Jack, blah, blah, blah. Now back to Calico Jack. Mm-hmm. He, now that he had Anne on his ship, he was slightly happier. He often prayed. He often preyed upon other pirate ships, generally.
So what I read was that he would attack ships and loot them or whatever, do whatever pirates usually do, and then he would ask some of the sailors if they would want to join his crew.
Yeah. One of the ships that Calico Jack raided, he found an English man. Mm-hmm. Though it was the last on his ship. And he invited this person to join his crew. And Anne Bonny took a liking to this person. Mm-hmm. Now, this person was Mary Read. Calico Jack didn't know this.
He thought that it was a man.
Mm-hmm. But the reason Mary Read was on that ship was because of something that had happened long, long ago. Mm-hmm. Her mother had a son before Mary was born. And the father left, but he died, and the son died, and Mary was the result of an affair.
This is all the very twisted history, folks.
For a couple years, everything was semi-decent. But then Mary's mother ran out of money, and so she dressed her little girl as a little boy.
And started passing her off as her older brother. And the reason for this was?
The reason for this was so that her in-laws, the mother's in-laws, could give her the cash that she wanted. Mm-hmm. Mary was 13 when her mother died and had to continue masquerading as a boy. She kind of had to because her mother put her in as a foot boy for a wealthy Frenchman. And eventually she up and left and went to join the military. She did meet a young man that she fell in love with. They got married. Everything was so happy. Like she joined a naval ship. So the whole crew knew that she was female. They didn't say it out loud generally.
She was a sailor at this point?
Yeah.
Sorry, don't mind my interjection.
Yeah, she joined the military, but she got onto like a naval sort of part of the military. And so the entire crew of the ship knew that she was female. They married her to the soldier. Everything was happy and so nice.
If only the story ended there.
It does not. Her husband dies. Her heart was broken. And she went back to living as a man. And she was on a different ship by the time Calico Jack captured it, raided it, and brought her to join her crew. His crew. And so Anne Bonny fell in love, generally, with this young sailor. And Calico Jack got very up in arms about it. Why is this woman that I like falling for this sailor dude that I rescued from the ship? You get the idea. Mary Read was forced to reveal her identity to both Anne Bonny and Calico Jack, and both of them kept the secret. And Anne Bonny and Mary Read both became good friends. However, their ship was captured in 1720 by the governor. All of them were tried in Port Royal. The court case lasted a little while, but the pirates were convicted of piracy, and the men were sentenced to hanging. The women, on the other hand, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, were able to get away.
Why?
Both were pregnant. Calico Jack was allowed to speak to his wife before he was hung, and he went into the cell. And according to a general history of the robberies and murders of the most notorious pirates by Captain Charles Johnson, Anne Bonny said, quote, "You would not have been hung like a dog if you would have fought like a man." Because when the ship was captured, all of the men had been intoxicated, and the only two to fight were Mary Read and Anne Bonny. Needless to say, her comforting words went with him to the end.
He was hung in the entrance of Port Royal, and that is actually now called Rackham's Key?
Yes, Rackham's Key. The women were kept in jail a little bit, and while they were there, Mary Read became ill, and while she was with child, and died of fever in 17 and 21. No one knows what happens to Anne Bonny. I like to think that she escaped, had her child, and
lived happily ever after.
Generally. Who knows what happened, though?
Again, though, with this story, I was having a great deal of fun reading about Anne Bonny and Mary.
Mm-hmm.
But, again, they weren't great people either. So they were both described to be ruthless and great fighters. In fact, I wrote it down that this one time, Mary Read fell in love with a carpenter on Jack Rackham's ship. And this carpenter got into trouble and was supposed to do a duel. And Mary intervened and killed the guy that he was supposed to do the duel with. So it's all very a twisted history of these two ladies. So there is a little bit of more information about pirates.
Yep. Yeah.
We may or may not do a bit more pirate information.
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to decide if we want to end the series here or if we want to do another episode or two of pirates.
Mm-hmm. If you have any pirates from the Caribbean, however it is pronounced, everyone pronounces it differently. If you have any pirates that you would like to hear, just send us an idea and we'll talk it over and we might do an episode on it. So.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. We're the Inkdrinker Historians.
Please like and subscribe.
Especially if you would like to hear more of our content.